let's talk about what the dark side really is and the secrets of the dark side, which will allow us to become the people we want to be and to be truly accountable, which is to transform. We are all aspects of the collective consciousness in the process of evolution. We are working out our part in the collective evolution, whether we are the Dalai Lama or the child molester, the harried housewife, the drunken child beater. It doesn't make any difference. We are all aspects of God's consciousness in manifestation and in form, and each one of us has some accountability to the whole, to God, to one another, to play our part, which is to take on the consciousness that we have been gifted with, so to speak, due to our biology, if you believe in karma, your upbringing, your society, whatever. And the key to that transformation is twofold. One is to get beyond the egoic perspective that I exist as a separate individual, and the other is to end the collusion between the ego and the dark side. And in order to do that, we need to understand the dark side, and that the dark side itself is an aspect of God's consciousness, and that it has a role. And that role is also evolving. That everything is in the process of evolution. God, us, the ego, and the dark side. Now, why do I say that we will not be able to be truly accountable until we can disconnect or end the collusion between the ego and the dark side? Well, it's really pretty obvious, isn't it? That when we strike out at others or we are hurtful to others because of our own pains and insecurities, our pain and insecurity is causing us to do that which is damaging to others, as well as to ourselves. And the ways that we have tended to protect ourselves have been dark. Dark side, and I'm going to explain what I mean by dark side. I mean negative emotions, and I'm going to talk about the dark side in a very objective way so we'll understand what that means. We can have anger, we can have any one of these emotions, and when they are given, when they are fulfilling their function, they are not negative emotions. Anger, for example, fear, they are not negative emotions. Not in and of themselves, are they?
No.
Anger, when you have that moment of anger, which is the message from your psyche that something is wrong, that is not a negative emotion, that is a moment of consciousness. If I have a pain, if I put my hand into a blender and I have pain, that's rather a helpful thing, wouldn't you say? Because it's giving me information. These and force can be used for the good. They are not in and of themselves negative. What is a negative emotion and what is the dark side? The dark side, here I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to read you how the dark side has been seen. In a mythological sense, the dark side can be seen as the collective of negative forces. We've seen this mythologically. In this paradigm, the dark side is evil engaged in a never-ending battle with good. It's the hero's job to defeat the dark side, which can also be seen as a projection of our own moral weaknesses. So the dark side has shown up in mythology frequently. And because it is so universal, so many cultures have these kinds of symbols, we know that this is universal human consciousness. 2, this is another way of looking at the dark side. In psychological terms, the dark side is used as a term to describe a negative aspect of an individual or a collective. Some people say that they have a dark side, a sometimes hidden part of themselves that they consider to be malevolent, sick, or harmful to others. For example, their use of pornography, or their engaging in child molestation, or fantasizing about killing or maiming others. Or our dark side can be seen in our addiction to sex, drugs, or other self-destructive substances or behaviors. So this is how we talk about our dark side. In sociological terms, some speak about the dark side or underbelly of a social system, referring, for example, to the perpetuation of inhumane working conditions for some in order to create wealth for others, or referring to crime or gang cultures. This is the dark side of our society. 4, in some cultures, the dark side is pictured as evil spirits or entities that attack innocent people and overwhelm or possess them. Examples of this are concepts of vampires and werewolves. There are also other non-animalistic concepts of dark side entities such as gremlins and demons. 5, religions talk about a dark side as well. In Christianity, for example, the dark side refers to the domain of the devil, which is the antithesis of God. The devil rules hell and personifies evil, and he tempts us to sin and violate religious teachings that are believed sacred. So from this you can see that a lot of people have noticed the negative aspect of human consciousness. It's out there. And some people revel in it, like they get into being the dark side, I see the dark side this way. The dark side is the constellation of negative energies, and I'm going to say exactly what that means. That is, energies that have no connection to the creative energy that has brought us all into being. While there are many names for this creative energy, such as God, universal life force, higher consciousness, I often use the phrase the source, especially in this context, because we are talking about the source of life. Negative energies have no direct connection to the source, so they live off others, drain us of life force, and block us from fulfilling our potential. Examples of negative energies are irrational fear, rage, out-of-control sexuality, pessimism, and hopelessness. It's the constellation of negative energies, and negative energies are energies that are not connected to source. Now that, of course, is also part of God, and I'm going to talk about that when we get to the 7 dirty secrets of the dark side. But if you have ever noticed that when you are dominated by negative emotions, by dark side energies, you may get a high, but it's always followed by a feeling of being drained. It's like the negative emotion takes you. You no longer have the anger, you are possessed by it. It's not surprising that people have that concept about possession by demons, because it feels like we are being possessed. It's like we lose our balance. We are no longer integrated whole beings. We are dominated by an energy that feels external to us almost. And yet it is us. And isn't that confusing? Well, I say, oh my God, but it's my anger, but is it really my anger? It's my anger, but it seems to be multiplied until it has very little resemblance to what I'm actually angry about. Have you ever noticed that? That when you get dominated by negative emotion and rage, you can't even equate. You have to rationalize. Frequently, you have to rationalize the degree of rage because it doesn't even seem to equate to what's going on. And of course we do, and then we just make it worse because we're rationalizing. When we are dominated by the dark side, we are no longer whole. We have no dynamic balance because our egos are running rampant, protecting ourselves by aligning with negative energy. Now, why would we do that? Well, if you have lived in a world where you see force dominating, aren't you going to get the idea that if you want your way, you need to get like that? You know, if you're the one that the bomb dropped on, you might think that the bomber has the power. So you know, what are you going to do? You're going to want to, so the self-protective ego says, I want the bomb. I want the bomb. What could that bomb look like? The bomb could look like yelling, screaming, beating, hitting, any of that. Or the bomb could look like endless guilt tripping. You know, whatever was the bomb in your house was probably the bomb of choice.
All the way up to the bomb, the H-bomb.
All the way up to the H-bomb. So our egos, when our egos are still out of balance and they haven't evolved yet and they're dominating us and we're only in the me, self-protection universe, we're going to be grasping for whatever looks like the greatest ally, and there's the dark side just waiting for us saying, hey, I'm your handy-dandy friend. Here to serve, at your service. And yet, here's the irony. This is what I'm trying to get across. The dark side is the constellation of negative forces that are eating you up. They look like they're giving you power. They look like they're giving me power, but they're really eating you up and eating me up because they are negative energies, meaning they have no life force. Guess what? They're living off us. They live off us. That's why we feel like we're possessed. Think about what a negative energy is. If you have a checkbook, and this is the example that came to me, and I think it's the easiest example to use. If you have $45 in your checkbook, you have $45. If you've got minus $45 in your checkbook, you have a negative net worth. That's what it is. It's something that's eating into what you have. It's taking away from you. So negative energies have to live off something. I use the example of a tick. Poor thing. It's got to be attached to somebody because it's got to eat. It's got to keep itself alive by living off somebody, some living thing. That's a very simple but easy to relate to analogy of what the dark side energies are. They're ticks. And guess what happens when the tick starts sucking on you? It gets more and more bloated, doesn't it? It starts growing and you start getting weak. Think about that the next time you're getting angry. That you're like some giant tick is living off you, off your psyche.
Right.
A big bloated tick. Now, pessimism and hopelessness are negative energies. Sadness and pain are not. Do you see what I mean? We can feel sad because that is an appropriate response to a moment, and then it comes and it goes. But when we're pessimistic, we're being... That has turned into a tick, and it starts growing, and we start shrinking.
Your pessimism precedes you.
Irrational fear is a negative energy. Fear is not. Irrational fear is. Yeah. Out of control fear is, right? Fear is smart. You're sitting on the railroad tracks. I always use that example. You're sitting on the railroad tracks, the train is coming down, and you say, I am going to overcome my fear. Splat. That's stupidity. But fear, when it becomes irrational, will make you either stand up and, I'm going to fight that train. You know, I'm going to prove myself. Or you become so fearful you're paralyzed and you just sit there while the train runs you over because you can't move because you're so afraid. These energies, when they become negative energies, they are out of balance. They are no longer serving their positive function, which is to give us information, and they dominate us. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit later how that happens. But I want to remind you that as children, many of us saw the dark side winning. People like James, who saw his mother devolve into psychosis, grew up with the belief that the dark side wins. When you had a parent who was taken over by drugs, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? You get to believe that the dark side wins. When you had a parent who was overcome by depression, you believe that the dark side wins. When you watched your parents where one of them slugged the other one and put him in the hospital and seemed to, even though they said, gee, I'm sorry, but seemed to always dominate in the family, the dark side wins. Or when you have the wife who is always hysterical and her emotions are completely out of control and the whole family is terrorized, the dark side wins. We've all seen it. We've seen it in the big corporations gobbling up the little guy.
And destroying the planet in the process.
And destroying the planet in the process. It's not surprising, is it, that our egos think that their best friends are, hey dude, it's the dark side. The simplest, I think, current kind of example that so many of us can relate to is youngsters who grow up in impoverished family situations where there's a lot of violence in their society, who see the gang leader walking down the road with a wad of dollars or 20s or thousands or however much in his pocket, and everybody's scared of him. Here, that's my hero. That's my hero. That's the guy who looks like he's got the power on the planet. The dark side wins. We are convinced. Most of us are convinced that the dark side always wins. No matter what we think we think. Because there are so many ways in which the dark side has won. And I'm going to talk about that in the 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side. And then many of us were trained not to stand up to the dark side. Don't disturb your father when he's in a bad mood. Or you can't fight City Hall. Or just take care of yourself. Or whatever the story is that you've been fed your whole life. Is not only does the dark side win, but we give it the store. Because we've been trained. And when we've been trained to stand up to the dark side, we are very often being the dark side, standing up to the dark side. Hey dude, I'm bigger than you are, I'm going to punch you out. Well, the dark side is still winning, because the dark side isn't the guy. The dark side is the energy. When we are arguing, and this happens to me when you're mad at me, and then I get mad at you, and you get mad at me for being mad at you, and I'm mad at you for being mad at me for being mad at you, the dark side wins.
That was good.
Forget who you're mad at.
So it's not about people. Get this, now hear this, people. It's not about people, it's about energy. The dark side is energy, and it wins. The 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side came to me like that one day. I think I was doing a workshop. And it just came out, the 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I had hit the jackpot. I don't know where it came from.
Living with Reality work.
It was a Living with Reality workshop, which is, before CBC we used to have them. And I had been learning things about the dark side. I had been learning that the first thing that you do when you deal with the dark side is to threaten it with the one thing it can't beat, which is positive life force. Give it life force. But I'll explain more of that later. But I didn't know what to do about it, and then these came. So I want to share these with you. 1. The dark side is the constellation of negative energies that need a host to survive. Don't be lunch. Being lunch means you become the host for the tick. Right? When you're lunch, and that's an expression that we use a lot in the stream, and I would love it if it moved around the world. Don't be lunch. If you're being overtaken by negative energy, we can say to you, hey dude, don't be lunch. Because when you are dominated by the dark side, when we are dominated by the dark side, we think we're powerful because our egos have, gotten into this dark side energy that makes us look all puffed up, like we're the puffed up tick. But actually, we are being eaten up alive. Our life force is being drained by the dark side. And that's embarrassing, isn't it? Isn't that a good little embarrassment? Because that's a call to consciousness. Since negative energies are energies that are disconnected from life force, they have no chi or life force of their own. If they had life force of their own, they wouldn't be negative. If there was a plus in your account, it wouldn't be a negative. So, if you have a positive balance in your checkbook, you have something quantifiable, even if it's only one. But if you have a negative balance in your checkbook, you are lacking the same amount. The negative energy exists only in absence. It's like a shadow. The shadow exists only because there's an absence of light. Mm-hmm. The shadow doesn't exist. It's only the absence of light that exists. Think about that. We're so darn scared of the dark side. On some level, it doesn't exist. It has no life force. Of course, the shadow appears to exist because you have the chair in front of the light and it's going to cast a shadow. But the shadow itself does not exist.
It's an illusion that only exists by virtue of the light that's thrown from the
Exactly.
positive thing.
Exactly. So we are real. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that the dark side isn't real. And I'm going to explain that. But what I'm saying is that a negative in your checkbook is not a real thing. It's an obligation. And the shadow is not a real thing. But it can have an impact, a tremendous impact on your life. Oh my God, I owe this. It's not anything tangible. You can't hold a debt in your hand. It's an obligation.
There's, in astronomy, I took an astronomy class in college, and it was the search for dark matter in the universe.
Yeah.
And the only way that they know it exists is because the universe isn't expanding fast enough for it not to exist.
Right.
So
It has an impact.
It has a gravitational impact, but you can't see it.
I love that.
Right.
We see its impact, but we can't see it. Where is it?
Yeah.
I love that. That's great. We, on the other hand, excuse me?
That's the dark side. It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's not real.
Because it has no energy.
Because it has no energy. It can't exist without us.
So you're distinguishing the dark side from dark energy?
No.
Because you just said it has no energy.
It has no energy.
It has no life.
It said it has no life force. A negative energy doesn't have any energy. It's a negative. Just like a debt there is nothing there. It's an obligation.
Right. But it is a negative kind of energy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't hold a debt in your hand. What is it?
Right.
It obligates you. It drains you.
Right.
But it's not a thing.
Not a thing.
It's not a thing. We are real living. We have life force.
Right.
Okay? Right. Negative energy does not have life force.
Right.
And it has to, in order for it to exist, it has to feed off something or somebody. So negative energy sap us of our life force, and therefore they block us from fulfilling our potential, because when we don't have our life force, we can't fulfill our potential. As parasites, they are desperate to stay connected to their host. But this fact makes them very vulnerable. Without something to live on, they don't exist. I mean, I know this is ridiculous, but can you imagine if everybody got up happy and accountable tomorrow, where would the dark side go?
Right. You would have no place to breathe.
It wouldn't exist anymore. Because
Well, if a tick has no dog to attack,
it's dead.
it would die.
Right, it would die. So we have found, see, dirty secret number one, right? The dark side is the constellation of negative energies that need a host to survive. That's their dirty secret. Don't be lunch. So the Achilles heel of the dark side is We absolutely have the power to defeat the domination of the dark side by refusing to be its source.
Right.
Now, boy, that sounds easy, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, sure. Now, this explains why when we start moving forward in any way, there tends to be a backlash.
Right.
First, the ego gets all up in arms, and then the dark side says, oh no, oh no, oh no, I'm starving, I'm hungry. Well, naturally, the dark side wants to survive. Poor thing, so we send it chi. We'll get more to that. The dark side wants us to think that it gives us power.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
The dark side wants us to believe that anger makes us powerful.
Right.
But actually, we give it power. We're giving our power away to this negative energy that's living off us and everybody else.
Right.
Sometimes it's not so easy to see that negative energies drain us. When we're caught up in negative righteous indignation, judgment or anger, for example, we think we're powerful, but that sudden flush of pseudo-energy is just a temporary illusion of empowerment. If we could always remember that when we are negative, we are food for the dark side, our little adrenaline rush ego moment would quickly come to a close. So I'd like to give you a tool, which is right here in Platform 7, first dirty secret of the dark side. Don't be lunch. When you see yourself being dominated by negative energy, being dragged down by depression, being pumped up by some righteousness or anger, think of yourself as food for some gremlin. Then laugh and say to yourself, don't be lunch. Sometimes we're so dominated by negative energy, we're not just lunch, we're breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If so, let's admit it. Seven dirty secrets of the dark side. Number 2. The dark side runs the planet through our complicity. Now, why do I say the dark side runs the planet? It may seem like an exaggeration, but isn't it true? When we look around, don't we see much more greed, fear, abuse, addiction, compulsion, and depression than we see compassion, expansion, and enlightenment? And how much negativity do we see in ourselves? How much do we hurt ourselves and others by being out of balance, filled with negative self-talk, competitiveness, reactivity, and self-destructive behaviors? How did the dark side take over the planet? Well, it's right in the book.
And you're not going to tell us.
I'm going to tell you a little bit.
Okay.
All patterns become habitual, and negative patterns can be powerful habits. So let's say one day we deal with our anxiety by eating sugar, and then the sugar eats the sugar, right? Because the sugar creates the addiction. So all we had to do is one little thing. We take the first drink, take the first moment of rage, take the first cookie, and before you know it, the sugar has taken the sugar, the drink has taken the drink, the rage has taken the rage. And woo! And it's true of every physical, mental, emotional, spiritual pattern that we get into, that when we start that pattern, it becomes self-perpetuating. And it may take an enormous amount of energy to stop it once it starts. Now, if we could catch it in the beginning, and that's what we're going to be doing in our anger workshop, is we're going to be learning more about how do we catch it in the beginning before it becomes the Grand Canyon and then we can't stop it anymore and then we have to justify it.
We're going to provoke each other.
Huh?
Are we going to be provoking each other?
Oh, sure. Don't worry, we always do. We don't even have to try.
That will just be normal.
Now, What's true for us as individuals is true as a collective, and I want to read this part to you. Our collective habits create a Grand Canyon of negativity. Let's look at violence, for example. When confronted by some real or imagined threat, an individual might be able to fight his or her own ego reaction to defend or attack, if the reaction were only his own. Okay, I feel this threat, and all right, okay, is it a threat? Can I get a grip of myself? He or she could take a breath, ask if a violent reaction is called for, check in to see if he or she is being dominated by some stimulus reaction response, as we've talked about in Platform 5. But if that individual lives in a violence-prone society, the collective energy within that society will reinforce the individual's tendency to fall into violence. It is much harder to be saintly in the gang than it is in the convent. And it isn't so easy to be saintly in the convent, as we well know.
That's right.
But it's so obvious that if the society is supporting that negative reactivity, then it's much harder for us to stop it, because the negative energy is not just my anger, it is anger itself. It is the energy of anger itself. If there is a lot of collective energy of anger, this is why you see so much violence among men, because they grow up in a tradition of collective violence. And when you're in the bar, you've had too many, and he says, my voodoo and you, and then, and then there's all the people around you who saying, you know, and all the collective rage and anger, and everybody else's rage and anger that they haven't even expressed yet, you're just like, it's feeding off you, and you think you're feeding off it, and before you know it, there's two idiots with bloody noses on the floor. And who wins? The dark side wins. If the collective habit of violence has become a Grand Canyon and automatic habitual reaction of a society, it's hard to stop the momentum. When, you know, oh, we are affronted, 9/11, they
Drove those buildings.
drove those planes into our buildings. There isn't a moment of reflection. We've talked about this. There's no moment of reflection as to why that might have happened. It's like, that's it. Our manhood is at stake, and we're marching off to war. Where is that country that we're invading?
Pick one.
Pick one. Right.
Let's make one up.
Right. The Martians did it. And the more militaristic the society, the more the society is geared that way, the more people are going to be that way. You know, there are societies that are more peaceful than others. Is it because those people just happen to be better? They're not like us? No, it's because their societies are better. And some are worse. You know, we have the Japanese society, you know, the militaristic tradition where everything was about honor and ego. And, you know, you're going to go out there and you don't even know why you're killing the other guy. But
Or killing yourself.
Right.
Right. If you can do it good enough, you got to kill yourself.
Right. So cultures are not different because the individuals within them are different. Individuals are different because their cultures are different. That's why, again, collective vortex of change. How are we going to make the cultures different so that the individuals are different, so that we are supported to be different? Be very careful what habits you feed. Today's trickle is tomorrow's Grand Canyon. And if the Grand Canyon is negative, the dark side starts to rule. We can just as easily, well, not so easily, because we have to deal with the collusion between the ego and the dark side. But at some point, we're going to be able to make habits, positive habits that feed us. And then the dark side starts to lose. And then the dark side freaks out because it's losing lunch. This is really critical. Be careful what habits you feed. Today's trickle is tomorrow's Grand Canyon. It's a lot easier to stop a trickle than a Grand Canyon. So it's easy to see how the dark side rules the planet. through our own actions. And then if this were not enough, negative energy spreads like a virus. While we all know that our egos are triggered by each other. When you get angry with me, I get angry with you, and you're angry with me, and so that the negative energy itself spreads through our connection to one another. Instead of supporting one another in being calm or loving or compassionate, he did that to you? The nerve! Yeah! And you know what else he did? And then political parties are famous for that. Look what they did! Look what he said! Yeah! Yeah! And so, because we are one, it's like it becomes an explosion. It doesn't take much, does it?
Explosion and a distraction.
And a distraction from what we should be doing. So because of oneness, we are unconsciously aware of one another's feelings. We pick them up and we reflect them back. And there's more. Negative energy compounds negative energy within us in other ways. When we have done something destructive or self-destructive, we often feel shame, even if we cover up that shame with deflection, blame, or denial. What energy could be more negative than shame when it gets out of control? Not that just that one moment of recognition. Doesn't shame feel like the bottom has fallen out? Isn't that the ultimate dark side energy? Because when we are in shame, we lose our chi. When we are in shame, we become lunch because we have no inner strength. Because, as I explained in Ego, Instinct, and Evolution, shame feels like we have no value. Value means no one will support us. No one will support us feels like death. The bottom falls out. Suddenly, I have no chi anymore. The less chi I have, the more able I am to be taken over. So, where we say, do life force, 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 or some other way of life force program, the inner workouts. Do something where you're filling yourself up with chi, because the weaker, the less, it's like anybody who's in a weakened condition. When that flu comes by, who is it going to get? Right. It's more likely to get you if you're weak. If you lack life force, you are more likely to be dominated by negative energy. Now, there are people who seem to have a tremendous amount of chi and still are dominated by negative energy. There are other mechanisms that can take place. We don't know any of those people, but but it's fascinating. But there must be something in that which is a lack of connection to the source, that even though you have that physical chi, there's that connection to source is gone, and then you still become lunch.
Well, I'm in a state of powerlessness, and in that's absolute disconnection from source.
Yes. So all the chi in the world, if it's disconnected from source, will do you no good.
Right.
Well, and just like, have you seen people who are that have huge muscles and seem really powerful, but they get some kind of infection that weakens them, and you look at this big strapping guy and he can't pick up a toothpick? So we can be, the fact that we have muscles or chi on the physical level does not tell the whole story, does it? So, our negative actions cause us shame, which serves us up as lunch to the dark side. Add to this that we often react negatively to our own negativity. Don't we sometimes, right? Don't we sometimes despair because we're negative or depressed? Oh, I'm so depressed. Oh, I'm so depressed. Instead of saying, I'm noticing today that I'm depressed. Oh, I'm so depressed. Oh, woe is me. Oh, it's horrible. Oh.
And then I feel bad about the fact that I'm depressed.
That's exactly right. Isn't that another depleting and debilitating response? And then, in addition, if that were not enough, we get angry with ourselves for having been bad, as well as resent those we blame for our being that way. It's like, I have been really bad, but my mother. So now, not only am I being negative about myself, I'm being a negative towards my mother. So, I couldn't help
But
that.
I've forgiven her hundreds of times.
Hundreds of times. And the beat goes on. Our reactions to our negative behaviors feed the dark side. That's why I keep saying, go neutral, go neutral, go neutral, go neutral. Drop the shame, drop the shame, drop the shame. Because now we're really beginning to get it on another level, I hope, that if we don't do it, we are feeding the dark side. And the dark side is destroying us. And then there's all that negativity we direct towards others, who themselves are being lunched. Okay, so-and-so is angry. Ooh, I hate him. I hate that guy because he's so negative.
No mirror.
People shouldn't be that negative.
That's right. Right.
Bad people.
I'm angry at you for having been angry. And so...
Judgmental.
it's so
That's a good one.
And instead of realizing that that person is being lunched, and we're going to get to that, we just get negative. So, and there's more, there's resentment we feel toward those who oppose us. Not to speak about machines that oppose us. I mean, this is a perfect preparation for our anger workshop. That machine is out to get me.
I'll just bring my laptop into the anger workshop and that's just...
That's it, and throw it across the room. I am that.
Crazy like that.
So negativity is compounding more and more and more and more. We can start out with one small little pain or fear or sadness or something, and it compounds and it compounds and it compounds and it compounds. Now we're beginning to catch on. This is how the dark side comes into being. This is how the dark side comes into being, not negative emotions or energies. This is how the dark side comes into being, because the dark side is the constellation. You can even have a momentary negative lapse, right? But it's when it feeds and feeds and feeds and feeds and grows and grows and grows, we are calling into being the dark side. Negative energy feeds on itself and grows exponentially. Isn't that something? It actually feeds on itself, but it still needs us to feed off of. What starts as a negative trickle gathers force until it becomes an ocean of negative energies that sap and destroy. This does not mean that we have to be Pollyanna and love everybody. And it doesn't mean that we should allow bad behaviors, but we do need to stop our being dominated by negativity and fill ourselves with allowance, neutrality, calm, serenity, and compassion. Then we can act appropriately, even forcefully, from an integrated place, and we are not empowering the dark side. See, the answer isn't that, oh, I just give in. It's that we have to be calm and neutral and get to a place in that moment where we can see, oh, okay, connect to source. What do I need to do here? We've seen how dark side energies grow in strength. Now let's zero in on how the dark side rules through dominating our egos. Sometimes the ego tries to protect us by making us look tougher, bigger, better than the other guy. Under these circumstances, the ego's tendency towards self-protection will push us into aggression. On the other hand, the ego sometimes uses a self-protective strategy of making us look small. If we're doing this, we're trying to make ourselves look non-threatening, what is the result? We're feeding the dark side, aren't we? We're letting the dark side rule. If we get small in the face of intimidating negative energy, it's no better than getting aggressive. We're throwing in the towel and surrendering our power. Either way, you see, the dark side wins.
It reminds me of a quote that was made by Edmund Burke. He said, all that is necessary for the forces of, quote, darkness to prevail in the world is for men of goodwill to do nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to summarize this, The dark side is and please read the chapter because I go into more detail and it takes a while to absorb this. The dark side is a collective energy that grows off our negativity and that of everyone else. And while our egos are busy protecting ourselves, the dark side is growing exponentially. Right? We're so busy protecting ourselves by being tough or being meek or being whatever it is that we're being, or going into denial or feeling shame or whatever it is, or not wanting to be accountable. While we're doing all of that self-protection stuff, the dark side is growing exponentially, feeding off the individual and collective negative energy and complicity that our egos allowed. So the second dirty secret of the dark side is that the dark side rules, but only because we let it. You know, I want to tell you that this revelation to me about the dark side, seeing the dark side rule, happened to me actually in a moment. I had an experience, and I'm going to share this experience with you. Many of you already know about this, but this was years ago when I went to see Master Hai, who's the healer who's now back, who's helping me again. And on the way there, I had started, I was having odd thoughts. I may have mentioned this recently, but it was like, why don't you just go through that red light? And I'm not suicidal, so it was a very odd thing. I'm on my way to go to this healer who's helping me, and even before that I was hearing, he's not helping you. He's not helping you. And I thought, am I insane? Where is this voice coming from? This doesn't sound like God. And why don't you just go through that red light? So I didn't know, and on the way there, I'm driving the car, and I also get this intuition, somebody's going to pull out from the right, and sure enough, somebody pulls out, thank God I was prepared. Somebody could have killed me, and the drive was awful, and as I was driving, I felt like I was being possessed, and I don't do a lot of that sort of possession type thing, but when I say I felt like I was being possessed, I felt like something was just taking me over. This just dark energy was sitting on my heart like it was going to kill me. And I thought, geez, maybe these negative energies really exist. You know, I didn't want to believe it. I was like Miss Pollyanna of, God, you know, everything is God, and so therefore there's no... And I didn't know the 7 dirty secrets of the dark side at that time. So, but I could feel this thing, and I just didn't get it. And I heard a voice that said, don't worry, Beth, you're just under attack. And I thought, attack? Attack? Attack from what? Is there anybody in the room? And by the time I got to Master Hai, I was so weak and so debilitated by this energy that I had to crawl into his office. And even for me, that was bad. Yeah. And I came into his office and sat down, and he walked over to me, and he came into the waiting room, and he looked at me, and he saw immediately what was going on. He walked over and he went like this. And he said, don't worry, Beth, you're just under attack. I thought I was out of my mind. And then here's this man who sees exactly what I'm experiencing, puts his hand like that, and it was over. Wow. I thought, oh my God, if I only had that power, would I love that. Man, oh man, it was just gone. But I realized something. See, that was the first thing. Then I left from there, and I went to get gasoline, and there was a woman who was wearing high heel shoes, tight black pants. Her breasts were hanging out of her shirt. She had bleach blonde hair. She waddled over to get gas. And I looked at her and I could see this negative energy all around her. I thought, my God, look at this poor woman. Look how uncomfortable she is. Look what she's doing in order to be attractive to men. That's dark side energy. That's no self-love. Competing just distorting yourself in order to make yourself attractive because you have no self-love. And I could just see it. And I looked around, and it's like in that second I saw all this negative energy. It's like I don't normally see things, I feel them. I'm a feeling person, But I saw all this negative energy, and I said, oh my God, the dark side runs the planet. But there's a secret that I learned, but it comes up later, which was, I thought about this on the way home. How interesting it was that I had that encounter with the dark side on the way to see Master Hai. And you could say, well, they were trying to kill me before I got there. But you could say, on the contrary, that this was God's way of giving me an experience that I needed to have in the safest possible way because I was going to get help. And so that's how I learned that the dark side does not run the planet. Even though I've just said that the dark side does run the planet.
I'd like to clarify something, if I may.
Okay.
Yeah. You talk about dark energies.
Yes.
Okay, dark side as energies. But when you were hearing that voice, and when Master Hai said you're under attack, there's really a consciousness there that was affecting you, that was impinging on you, that he helped you get rid of, taking it off of you. So we're really talking about more than just energy. We're talking about a being. It's like a parasite from the inner planes, the inner realms.
No. That's a metaphor. Remember in the beginning, I'm saying no, as that's not what I've learned. In the beginning I said in mythology it looks like this, in psychology it looks like that, in religion it looks like that, and so on.
In certain cultures.
In certain culture this way.
Right.
It's all energy. We are energy.
But with
it is energy.
With consciousness.
But when you say that, it sounds like it's intentional in the same way that a tick wants to keep going. But if you're saying it's a being, then you can use that as a metaphor if you want to. The tick is a metaphor. If you want to call it a being, you can call it a being.
Well, the tick is a being, and this is it's something that's feeding off of you.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the tick is a metaphor. The tick is not the dark side. To the carrot, we're the tick. We live off vegetables. You see what I mean? So what I'm saying is that it's all energy, that you can give it that interpretation, and if that's a way that works for you to think about it, that's fine. But what I really would prefer that people start thinking about it as energy, because it becomes more neutral, less egoic. If we're saying he did this to me, that consciousness is against my consciousness, then we're getting into I'm an individual, that's an individual, we're going to get into an ego battle. If you think about it more in terms of energy, positive and negative, then you're going to be less likely to personalize it and less likely to be afraid, because you're beginning to see it as energy. Does that help clarify?
Well, it allows you to have differentiation and recognizing that you're having a relationship with it on some point. And then if you change that relationship with it, then that experience you're having will change.
Yes, if you see it as energy also, then you can see it as something that you have within you as well. If you're thinking about it as a consciousness that is only external to you, which is when you give it that personification like a demon or whatever it is, and you say, oh, it's a demon, or it's a demon within me, then it seems to have a concreteness. Whereas, like say, it's negative energy. It is a way of being that depletes us, that weakens us, and as it grows into a constellation, then it begins to take on a life of its own. But it is not separate from us. In fact, if it were separate from us, then it wouldn't be true that it only rules because we are complicit. It would mean that it really has an existence that's independent, and it doesn't, because it's a negative energy. Just think about that as a different way of looking at it.
I'll just share with you this, that it's part of my belief system that everything that exists has consciousness. The rock has consciousness, the plants have consciousness. And so when you use the term energy, there's an energy there that itself has consciousness.
Well, there it is. Yeah. It's an energy that has consciousness. Just like if you want to say that it has, it's an energy that has intention. Mm-hmm. That's fine. As long as you're keeping in the awareness that it really is just an energy, and that we can feed it or not feed it. Because otherwise, if we don't think of it that way, as I say, it begins to have a life external to us, and then there's nothing that we can do. And then we can get into these battles. So I agree with you that everything has consciousness. But that's another whole conversation. But do you understand the point that I'm trying to make? And you don't have to agree with me. I'm just saying that's...
I understand the point.
Yeah.
So are you just making it more objective
Yes.
that way?
Yes.
Because in this astronomy class, they did talk about there being subatomic particles
that they think comprise this dark matter in the universe. But when I think of it like that, instead of it being the dark side, like Darth Vader or something, it's just a bunch of little subatomic particles.
Right. So if we see it as energy that we can feed or that we can calm, then we really have some power. And that's the purpose of our beliefs, is to have beliefs that are useful and helpful. that work for us.
But in your example of, oh, why don't you go ahead and run that red light, where did that voice come from? Or do you think it was just your own thought, or was there some influence?
No, it wasn't my own thought. I say there is a dark side, but the dark side is the constellation of negative energies.
Which had a thought that said, run the red light.
The energies didn't have a thought. The energies don't, it's not that the energies had the thought, but the energies that were coming towards me created that thought in my mind.
Or you
The
could
energy
say that's
itself
the way
didn't-
your mind translated the vibrational
That's-
essence of what they were communicating, which is, give up, you're no good, you have
Yes.
no value, and that's the way it got interpreted in her.
If the energy wants to continue to live off me, for example, it's going to come after me, and my brain, it's like in every society we have different images and metaphors. Well, are any of them real? Of course not, because in every society, this one sees God as being this way, but everybody is talking about the same thing, but we have different pictures because that's because the human mind has to create a picture that works for us. It's no different than the masters. The masters are an energy, and of course there's a consciousness there, but they're a vibrational frequency. That's what I mean by an energy. It's a vibrational frequency that I am going to translate into Lord Katumi or into the light or into a tree or whatever it is that my human brain is going to project onto that energy to make it comprehensible to me.
Okay.
That's the best that I can do.
Okay, very good.
Now, 3, don't try to fight the domination of the dark side alone. And that is so important because when we begin to realize that the dark side is a constellation of energy, how the heck are we going to fight a constellation of energy by ourselves? It's not me against Darth Vader. Is he the bad guy? Yeah. Okay. It's not me against the monster. It's me against the entire constellation of negative energy. I can't do that. And yet our egos tell us that we should be able to. Because after all, I feel weak in relation to it. So how I'm going to prove my strength is by puffing myself up and fighting it. So our heroes, are the little guy who stands up and cuts the head off the giant. Yeah, if it were only so easy.
Right.
And we love that. The ego loves that. And in a way it's a good metaphor because it's telling us don't be afraid of the giant. Just because something looks bigger than you are doesn't mean that it is bigger. I mean, Samson and Delilah, Samson's supposed to be a good dude, but all you had to do was cut off a lock of his hair. And we're trying to say, hey, we have tools to deal with the dark side that actually will start disempowering it if we start paying attention. But we shouldn't be trying to deal with it alone because it's not my dark side. Just like it's not my ego. It's not personal. That's another reason that it's helpful, or I think it's useful, to use these concept of energy because we're looking at this constellation of energy, and I need a constellation of energy to start to gain the power to no longer be dominated. When I refuse to be lunged to that constellation of negative energy, then it's over.
Would you say what you mean by constellation? Is that like the
It's a-
entirety of it?
A constellation of energy is like a collection, yeah. Yeah, a congregation, a cluster. There it is. That's a good way. A cluster. So it's a cluster of all the, if you think about it as all the negative thoughts and feelings and rage and depression and all of that, that's floating out there in the, think of it this way. Think of all the negative thoughts and feelings that are floating around on the planet, like a dark cloud.
Right.
Okay. And there it is. And there you are.
That's very impersonal.
Very impersonal.
All of it.
And while that's happening, and it could be right in your home, it could be in you, it could be in your partner, it's in your family, it's in your community and all of that. And here you are, and here it is, and you're going to say, I am going to be the one drop of water that's clean. I'm going to be the one house in Los Angeles that has clean air over it, right? That I'm going to clean the air over my house in LA and the rest of the air is going to be dirty. Well, that's impossible. And it's the same thing with negative energy. I cannot be the only person on the planet who is not dominated by negative energy. I can't be, because I don't have the power to, I'm going to work on it, and we're going to talk about how, but I don't have the power to stand up to all that negative energy. I'm too weak by myself. So don't try to fight the dark side alone, and that's something that the dark side tells us we should do. I'm calling you out, bud. Just you. Just come on. Hey, yeah, just you. Let's fight it out, duke it out at the OK Corral.
And all our myth,
Yeah,
stories.
John Wayne and...
Well, that's only true as long as that vibrational imbalance is within you, because if you actually heal that process that relationship used to be with, there is no longer a relationship with that dark side.
Well, I don't completely agree with that. I would say that that's a process.
We never actually get to a place that we transcend any of this consciousness?
Well, no, I don't mean that
always
either.
vulnerable to it?
Not at all. There's 7 dirty secrets that we're going to discuss. But what we do is that when we don't try to do it alone, we are creating the collective vortex of being able to change that relationship as opposed to trying to do it by ourselves. And because we are, let me go on. And because we are one, we are impacted constantly by one another's consciousness. And the more that we try to do what you're talking about, Christopher, which is to change that relationship, the more we're feeding that collective vortex where we are together changing that relationship. So of course we are responsible. And of course we can take steps, but I am not going to set myself a goal of being the only human being on the planet who is not susceptible to the dark side. I am going to set myself a goal of being part of the oneness, because I was taught that there's no personal salvation because I'm part of the oneness to start with. So if I am part of the oneness, then what I'm going to do is try to work with everyone to create a stronger and stronger energy field collectively, so that each one of us is empowered by what the other one is doing. So for instance, on your journey, as you're trying to make that shift, you are empowered by the fact that Roz is doing it, or that Bill is doing it, the rest of us are doing it. And together we are creating more and more of a possibility of not being dominated by the negative energy. So yes, it's true, we have to aim for that, but at the same time, if we're smart, we're not going to do it alone, because we are not individuals to start
That wasn't
with.
quite what I meant. All I meant is that if you actually no longer have a vibrational place of that energy in you, in other words, you have worked that out,
The crack.
that
You healed the
energy
crack.
can no longer be attracted to you because you no longer have that vibrational place. That's what I meant.
I understand that, and I'm saying that the process of doing that.
That's all I was, the point I was
Okay.
making.
Yeah. Well, of course we're going to be talking more and more about how do we do that. So,
Great.
but let's not try to do it by ourselves, because that's what gets us into trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's harder, Annie.
Just wanted to clarify something, but as soon as you said the last thing, I think you clarified it. 'Cause I was getting confused between negative emotions and whether they're always the dark side, like you were saying fear and anger, they're negative emotions. But you were saying that there is a healthy.
No, they're not negative energies. They're not negative emotions. They're just emotions. Fear isn't.
Irrational fear.
You said despair was a negative emotion.
I said irrational fear. I started despair, because despair is not an emotion. It is a despair is when you've been taken over by the negative energy.
That's what I just.
Oh, I thought you said fear. I'm sorry.
No, I thought a minute ago you were talking about fear and negative emotions, but.
No, I'm not saying that. Fear is an emotion. Fear is a necessary aspect of human consciousness. But irrational fear, despair, pessimism, depression, hopelessness, rage, and so on.
Yeah, it's like if we put them on a spectrum of energy, you could say that all of those are the place that's the greatest disconnection from you and Source and your spirit connection. And that you're feeling that disempowerment and disconnection. And that vibrational energy is, a constant stream. until you get up to bliss. And bliss is that oneness connection. There is no of that separation.
Well, that's because, exactly, when we are completely connected to Source, then we're not in that place, because the negative energies are energies that are disconnected from Source. So if we're not connected to Source, we are, but I don't want it to get so theoretical, because that is not going to help people. I really want to keep this on a more concrete level. I'm not missing what you're saying. What I'm saying is that absolutely, as we get to a place that we're more and more connected to Source, we're less and less vulnerable to that negative.
I think you misunderstood what I meant.
Yeah.
I said all it was is reflective on the intensity level of the amount of disconnection that you have.
Right.
Depression and despair is the
Right.
lowest at the extreme, and joyfulness and bliss is at the highest. And any one of those is an indicator to you of how disconnected you are.
Absolutely.
And if you used it that way, it's like, oh,
It's just
I'm just
information.
off right now.
Yeah, okay, well, let me get to that, because we'll get to that. Okay. There seems to be some, I don't know what, because I can feel some agitation. Yeah. Okay, so now the ego is always separating us from one another. So obviously the ego colludes with the dark side, because when the ego separates us from one another, then we tend to be alone, and when we're alone, we're more susceptible to the dark side. Don't fight the dark side yourself. Don't try to be a hero, even in your dreams. And do you see what I mean? How the ego is always separating us? And when the ego separates us from one another, then we tend to be alone. When we tend to be alone, we're more likely to be dominated by negative energy. Isn't that obvious?
Yeah.
When we're left with our own thoughts?
It
Okay.
happens a lot.
4, don't fight against the dark side. Fight for yourself. Once we've committed to getting support to taking on the dark side, we need to understand how to fight. And here's the next dirty secret of the dark side. If we get angry with the dark side and fight against it, we are just increasing the negativity on the planet. Again, this is why sometimes using images like, of a consciousness or a being or a demon is not helpful for most people, because that's when they're going to tend to get into negativity. It's like, you trying to get me, I'm going to get you. And I'm not saying that that's true for you. I'm just saying that that's one of the reasons that I try to veer away from that way of talking and thinking. This is really an attempt to put things in a perspective that makes it more possible for us to deal with it in a way that works. So if we get angry with the dark side and fight against it, we are just increasing the negativity on the planet, and oh no, there goes the dark side growing again. There is nothing we can do about that. It is perfectly normal that we will have that moment of anger. If you see somebody you love being taken over by a negative emotion, a depression, a rage, if you see the armies coming in and taking over your nation, if you see somebody beating your child, of course the first thing you're going to do is feel angry. But if you stay there, you're feeding the dark side. That's all. It's common sense. Once you get that it's an energy and not a being and not a person, and it's not personal, then you really understand that you can't do that, because it's only going to end up in increasing the power of the dark side. Yes, Chris?
I found what you said such a wonderful key turn in the lock, because I noticed that when I start to feel certain emotions, particularly angry, I so quickly feel like, oh my God, this is bad, this is wrong.
This is wrong. This
Right.
is wrong. Right.
And just allowing it to be, what we were saying is really helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
A directional signal. Don't stay there and let it dominate.
Don't stay there. Don't feed the anger. Let that anger be a piece of information. There is something off here. Something is going wrong. What is it? Let's take a look at it. Now, does this mean that we should not fight back? No. But the way to fight back is to fight for something, not to fight against something. I'm fighting for my integrity. What Christopher was talking about. Fighting for the integrity of my energy field. I'm fighting for my integrity. And that is a fighting for. And then there are things we can do, take a breath, take a walk, gather chi, call for support. Now, if I'm going to fight for myself, I have to know what myself is. It is a tricky question. Myself is not my reputation. Myself is not my ego. Myself is not the way I look, it's who I am. It's the essence of who I am. It is the integrity of my energy. It is my connection to Source. I am fighting for my connection to Source. And yet most of us are fighting for the ego's agenda. Sometimes the best way to fight for ourselves is just to connect to a different energy. It brings us back to Platform 2 when we talked about differentiation. Listening to music, do yoga, tai chi, connecting with nature, by calling on a level of consciousness or a vibrational energy that is clearer, more positive, less dominated by the dark side. Go to somebody who you don't think is going to be nuts. If you have just had a traumatic experience, don't go to the person you know who's most hysterical. So we connect to the Source because we know that that's how we are going to become less dominated by negative energy. If negative energy is the lack of connection to Source, to the life force, then as we fill ourselves with that positive energy, then we are less connected to that negative energy. We are not feeding it, and it can't feed off us. Another way to fight for ourselves is to deal with our state of mind by practicing some of our platforms. And I go into some detail about this. When confronting negative energies, our old way of coping is to merge or separate. We either merge with the negative energy because it makes us feel safe to be with the gang, or we separate. But we need to practice differentiation. I don't look at the rapist and say, I am not you. I look at the rapist and say, I have that in me, but I'm not going there. And I'm going to connect to the energies that will bring me peace and calm. And we will call generously on our tools of self-awareness, which we learned in Platform 5, to become aware of what's happening to us. To pull this off, it's very helpful to be in a state of physical integrity as well. I have to be prepared for every challenging moment of every day. That's why we need to eat right, we need to not pollute ourselves, because when we are in a debilitated physical condition, we are more likely to be open to be dominated by negative energies. And you could say, well, it doesn't matter, I was on vacation, I could eat that. It didn't matter. Excuse me, the dark side's always ready to pounce. The dark side is never on vacation. Negativity never takes a nap.
That's a good one. A new bumper sticker.
New bumper sticker. Negativity never naps.
Tip, don't fight for the ego, fight for the self. Remember that. Now we can still have feelings. When we connect to higher consciousness and become more neutral, it does not mean that we become zombies or that we will have no emotions. We are sentient beings and we're meant to feel happy, sad, afraid, pissed off, motivated, tired, or whatever is appropriate in the moment. But negative energy is not normal emotion, which gives us information and passes. It is negative energy out of balance that dominates and drains us. It grows exponentially and blocks our potential. Anger is supposed to be a tool of consciousness. Remember that. And we fight for ourselves as a collective too. And that's where the nonviolent movements have taught us so much. I think that we can learn more from history because we've seen graphically how nonviolent movements have fought for the right thing without fighting against. And if we can take that as an inspiration and say, I can do that. I can do that too. I can be inspired. Ordinary human beings did that. You know, there may be saints who are capable of going into the blissful consciousness and be totally not impacted. I don't know any. Good luck. Be one. I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to ask for support because I can't do that. But also, it's important because we are one. And we need to create that collective vortex, and we need to engage one another in the fight, not only because I need you, but because when I ask you to help me to be calm, that calls upon you that same capacity that I'm asking you for, and it grows within you. You will grow in the arena that I call upon. You will grow in consciousness when I ask you to be conscious. Because you're putting your intention into doing that. You feel the call. How many of us have risen to the occasion in an emergency or when somebody around us is in trouble? When we have the same problem they do, and in that moment something snaps in our head, and instead of going into our own habitual reaction response, we actually come out with something completely different from what we would normally say. We have risen above our own old behaviors because it's been called upon. It's necessary, and we've risen to it because it's also within us, because all these capacities are within us, not just the negative.
That's inspiring.
Dirty secret number 5. The best way to fight the domination of the dark side is to empower it. As it says in the book, now you're really crazy. What do you mean? That I need to support people who do bad things? Are you saying that if I meet Lucifer on the road, I should put a machine gun in his hand or nominate him for president? Of course not. First, it's important to acknowledge that hurtful behaviors must be stopped if it is possible to stop them. This is for the protection of all beings involved, including the perpetrator, him or herself, because you don't help killers by allowing them to kill. Allowing them to kill only causes them to feel more shame and fear of themselves. It supports them to disconnect from themselves and reality. And it leads to their need for increased self-justification, and sometimes even encourages them to repeat or escalate the damaging behaviors. The same is true for our own negative behaviors. I do not help myself by allowing me to hurt myself through self-destructive behavior. I do not help myself by allowing me to abuse you either, because I then have to carry within me the scars of guilt and shame that will haunt me. So stop me when I'm running amok, please. And I commit to stop you. We need to stop negative behaviors, but we only need to use the amount of force necessary. Because if I go beyond the amount of force necessary, then I become part of the dark side. I become used by the dark side, I should say. You know, there was yet another scandal about police officers who beat to death this mentally ill man. And they had it on video, half an hour of beating. And how the video, I never found out how the video was made because I don't usually read these stories, but it turns out that his father is a retired police officer. This is what I'm talking about. It's so difficult when we give to people the power and that force, and we don't educate them and make sure that they're psychologically capable of handling that force. What they might end up doing is losing control and becoming tools and becoming lunch to the dark side. They are taken over by all the rage they've ever felt and all the rage in the society, and then they're going to act it out, and then everybody says, what's wrong with them? As though they're unique, like they're some kind of monster. Look at what happens in wars. Look at the things that people do in war times they would never think of doing normally. The My Lai massacre, for example, in the Vietnam War. I mean, it's that people just going in and massacring people. It's like they're dominated by that negative energy. So when people are given power like that, they need more consciousness training.
Yeah.
And we need to stay connected to them and keep feeding them the power,
The chi.
the chi. And we need to realize that when people are doing bad things, they are being lunch to the dark side. Fighting the dark side in the old way is not working. When we try to disempower people, you say, okay, well, he's a bad guy, we're going to put him in prison. We're going to disempower him. So it just creates more negativity. I mean, the prisons then become full of negative energy. So that one secret the dark side doesn't want us to know is that when we focus our anger at the offending person, we are taking away from those people any power to fight from themselves. If you're angry at me, and my first reaction to that is I get angry at you and I leave it at that, what happens is you are left alone. And when you're left alone fighting all that negative energy within you. Sometimes people can pull themselves out of it. A lot of times they can't, because they are launched to the dark side to start with, and they're trying to fight it alone, and then they feel shame and then we've withdrawn. So that doesn't mean, as I say, you don't throw yourself into the line of fire. You have to stop abusive behavior when it's taking place, but you never disconnect. And at the very first possible moment, you send chi to the dark side. That means you're giving them power. You're giving that person the power to fight against that negative energy, and in a sense, you're giving the dark side power too. And I'll explain.
But you're also helping them connect with the source.
Yes.
They've been disconnected from the source.
Exactly. And I'm going to get to that, because right now there's two tools here. See hurtful people as lunch. Have compassion. Realize that they're being dominated by something that's taken them over, instead of just vilifying them and judging them and leaving them in their shame and their isolation. And do the same to yourself. When you've done something off, don't leave yourself without your self-love and compassion. Go somewhere. If you've lost self-love and compassion, go to somebody who will have compassion for you to help remind you. Understand that people who act powerful because they're using dark side energies are not powerful at all. They are lunch. And when they have that, they have more power to fight for themselves. That's why we gather chi. When somebody's in a bad place and we can't reach out to, they're not willing to accept our support, we sit there and gather chi, because we're creating an energy field around them where they are getting support. Even if it's not personal from us, that energy field is empowering them. This is part of our counseling techniques. When you have a client who's completely in resistance, they're in fear or in pain of some sort, and they won't take your help, gather chi. It wouldn't hurt. And then the second thing is that we send chi. That means we send chi not only to the person but to the dark side, because the dark side is the constellation of negative energies that has no connection to the source. I want to see the dark side having connection to the source. See, I'd like to bring this up again about not trying to do this as the Lone Ranger. I am not looking to become this elevated being who is never impacted, because I am part of the oneness, but I'm also part of the oneness with the dark side, because we're all part of God, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So by sending chi to the dark side itself, we're helping the dark side to make the connection to the source. And then when the dark side makes its connection to the source, then it no longer has to live off us and is no longer negative energy. The moment that energy has chi, it is no longer negative energy. I can't just fix myself. I have to fix the dark side too. Duh. Because we are all one and we're all part of God. And that is a hideous thought, isn't it? You say, well, I can't do that. I can't even fix myself. You're right. You can't even fix yourself. So stop trying to just fix yourself, and let's try to shift the entire consciousness and send support to the dark side. I've been feeling some dark side energies this month as we've gotten to Platform 7. It shouldn't be surprising. But I feel a shift taking place. Honest to God, I do. And I've been sending chi to the dark side, feeling like something is shifting, because the more that we do this, the more the dark side has something to work with. If you want to use the metaphor of pulling an entity or a negative energy out of somebody, I have done that. I'll pull it out of you, and I know you've done this too, James, and then send it to the source. You don't put it in a box. You don't incarcerate it. You try to connect it to the source. And because we are one, the more I do that, amazingly, I'm not even working on myself and I'm getting better. Because we are one. So it's rather complicated because we are one. Makes things a little bit more complicated, but on the other hand, it makes it simpler. Do it everywhere. Send chi to the person who's being dominated. Send chi to the dark side itself. Ask for chi. Gather chi. Gather connection to source. Keep supporting the connection to source. It's our chi tool. Give them the finger. And we have the tool. When we are confronted by someone's negativity, we try to reach out to them. But whether or not they accept our intervention, we have another tool to help. We point fingers 2 and 3 in their direction as though we were aiming a gun. But this is not a gun to kill. It's loaded with our intention to support. It's loaded with chi. We send chi, we gather chi. That intention changes us if it does nothing else.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, it changes what's in the field, and it does change them. Absolutely. We have to do this together. Every one of us has the capacity to tap into the universal life force. I'm going to be teaching you way more about how to do that in second year CBC, in the esoteric arts and sciences, about how do we actually get more mastery over our ability to channel these energies. But for now, just go like that. Just gather chi. We've been practicing this. When I wrote the book, I don't even think I had the tool of gathering chi. I think that came afterwards when we started doing CBC.
Last month.
Gathering chi, no.
Or 2 months ago.
It's done.
Gathering chi,
Yeah.
But not the sending.
Yeah. The sending chi is in the book. So there's a bunch of tools in the book. That's one of it, sending chi. But now we have gathering chi too. And Casey's going to go back and watch all those videos in case he missed it. So it's the universal life force. So yes, the fifth dirty secret of the dark side is that the best way to dissolve the dark side is to empower it. To send it life forward and support it to connect to the source. God told me years and years and years ago, nobody has too much power. Nobody has enough power. That's the fact. Nobody has enough power. The guy who struts upon the stage and tries to impose his power on you, who looks powerful, who wants to dominate, who runs the nation, who runs the gang or the military, whatever, or the giant corporation, doesn't have enough power. Never does. Never does. Is always compensating for feelings of weakness. We don't need to have big guns when we have big consciousness. That's why we have it. It's because we lack a feeling of inner well-being and peace and power. Let's try to bring that inner well-being, peace and power. When we vilify our opponents, we're just creating more condition for them to need to puff themselves up. And that includes our political opponents. Don't vilify the political opponent. No matter how wrong we believe their positions are, no matter how much harm we think their behavior is doing, don't disempower that person anymore than they already are, because you're just going to make them worse. Make them more susceptible to puffing themselves up with negative emotion, which is the only way they've ever known. Don't not confront them. Stay connected. There's the paradox. You have to stop the bad behavior, but you empower the person. 6. This is the good one that I kind of gave you a clue before. Because remember, second dirty secret is that the dark side runs the planet, and I talked about how that happens. Well, guess what? In the sixth dirty secret of the dark side does not run the planet.
Well, the first one was with our complicity.
With our complicity. The source runs the planet, and the source uses the dark side to promote evolution. And this really pisses me off. This is a way to promote evolution. Couldn't you have thought of anything better?
Dark side light.
Dark side light, yeah. I don't get it. I just obey orders, take notes, make a note of. Gotta learn the rules, whether I like them or not, right? So, okay. Isn't it a bit of contradiction to say that the dark side doesn't run the planet? Yes and no. If you were to go outside in a rainstorm, you would say it's raining, right? And that would be true. But suppose you were able to rise above the clouds, you would see that it's raining only under the clouds. Above the clouds, it's not raining at all. Using this analogy, the dark side runs the planet only under the clouds. The source runs the whole show, under and over the clouds. And if the source or the intelligence of the universe runs the planet, there are rules that the dark side has to follow. Ooh, I was so happy to learn that. Laws of the universe that are beyond its power to change, and we're learning these rules now with our study of the 7 dirty secrets of the dark side. Now, by the source, I mean the creative force, the creative intelligence, the chi, the great spirit, God, the who cares what you call it. Anyway, if this is the case, why does so if the source is the power behind the whole universe, why does the dark side rule? Well, like it or not, this is the way it seems to work. The 6th dirty secret of the dark side is the source actually runs the planet and uses the dark side to promote evolution by showing us where we're weak. And that comes back to the point that Christopher was making earlier. If I can see, and I call it in here, we're using a certain metaphor, we call it a crack. What let the dark side in? How did it happen? And the analogy that came to me was if you had an urn or a vase and you stuck it into a vat of ink, if it has complete and full integrity, which we can't because we're part of the oneness, but if it did, if it was alone and it had complete integrity, then the ink would not get through. But if it has a crack, the ink will get through. So if you think of the dark side as the ink, for the moment, then could somebody support Roz energetically? She's struggling. If the dark side is the ink, what is it showing us? Where the crack is. So, and our job is to take that as information. So let's say you have a tendency to blow up. Not that you do, but if, you know. But let's say, hypothetically, you had a tendency to blow up. You know, instead of going to shame about it, or denial, or guilt, or whatever it is, if you said, now that is really interesting. I blew up this morning, I wonder why. You may not even get the answer, but the fact that you're asking the question has already put you way ahead of the game. Because you're looking at where's the crack. You say, what triggered me to blow up? When you find that out, you can start healing it. When you start healing it, you are no longer susceptible. So the next time that happens, whatever it is, if you've healed that, then you're not going to have that reaction anymore. That's what I mean by healing the cracks. And the dark side shows us our weaknesses. And it does such a good job. I mean, par excellence. Any little weakness. And the thing that gets me is the more evolved and well you get, doesn't mean that you're not going to find these. Because I'll tell you something. There's always another crack and another crack and another crack. Partly because we are still humans and we're in that dynamic balance of becoming integrated. Because we still have egos and are still playing that dance of learning how to integrate the ego. And also because we are one. And until we are all completely whole, we cannot be whole ourselves because we don't really even exist.
Yeah, like anytime there's stretch marks.
That's right.
That's helpful to know that. You know, that there is no point where you're not going to find cracks.
No.
Never think you're going to get to that point.
No. And don't even try. And because that's not the purpose. That isn't the purpose. In the statement from the masters, the message from the masters, they told us that even they are challenged. It's just their challenges are bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So as the child, maybe our challenge is sharing the toy with Johnny. And as the adult, it is taking on, 6 children, a full-time job, and an explosive partner. And every time we evolve onto new levels of responsibility, we are going to have bigger challenges, and our cracks are going to show. And so there it is. We're looking, here's an example of how the dark side promotes evolution. We created antibiotics to get rid of the germs that were killing us and blocking us, right? And what do those little germies do?
Mutate. Now they probably use that drug as a beneficial energy for them.
That's right, they're probably living on them. Challenge supports evolution by showing any species its weaknesses. The dinosaurs didn't evolve, and that's why they're not here. But the cockroach has lived forever.
Yeah.
You know.
It can live off anything.
Yeah.
It's almost perfect. It's amazing that,
Amazing. Amazing. So we can see that challenge promotes evolution, can't we? We need challenge to keep growing. If we're not challenged, we don't grow. So it isn't even about reaching a perfect state of wholeness and well-being, and then we're going to sit there and never be impacted, because we are supposed to be constantly challenged, because we're supposed to evolve, because the universe is evolving. There's always going to be something coming along that's going to challenge us, that's going to show us another crack, and then we're going to evolve. And something that may not have been a weakness at one time becomes a weakness at another. And that's another acute thing, because as we're evolving and our challenges, maybe at one point our challenge was to sit still, and then the next challenge is to get up. You see what I'm saying? So it never ends. It's a never-ending process of challenge, evolution, challenge, evolution, challenge, evolution. So if we could get over shame, we could look at the cracks. If we looked at the cracks, we could learn what the dark side is here to teach us. And in that way, we are working in a synergistic mode with the dark side, and it becomes our friend. And there's collective evolution, and there's individual evolution. Let's consider how the dark side creates collective evolution. We see species evolving. Let's consider how the dark side creates or supports individual evolution. I have a lousy marriage. I learned something from it. I grow and I move on. I've evolved. I have a lousy marriage. I stay stuck in it. I blame my husband. I don't evolve. We have all done extremely self-destructive things. We can learn from that. Sometimes the destruction can't be turned around. Sometimes it can. But if our consciousness can grow, then it's served a purpose. We have evolved. What are my weaknesses? Do I pretend they don't exist? Or do I acknowledge them? What are the negative experiences that have brought them to my awareness? What are these terrible things that have happened that have made me aware of my weakness? Have I tried to strengthen them myself when I see them? Have I evolved? Or have I gone into self-pity? Have I gone into denial? Have I gone into self-justification? I haven't evolved. Then in a strange way, the dark side has failed to do its job. How do we heal these cracks? We have a lot of tools for healing our cracks, don't we? All the counseling work we do, all the consciousness work we do, all the physical support that we can give ourselves. Here's an example, a typical crack, the need to be loved. Yes, even the need to be loved, which is a normal need, can be a crack when the dark side can use it to get me. If I know that I have a tendency to seek the approval of women, even to my own detriment, I can look into the genesis of this behavior and ask my friends to bust me when I'm throwing myself away to be loved. Do the self-analysis, ask for support. In addition, I can seek professional help. I can ask for support from a self-help or mutual support group. I can seek spiritual guidance, and I can do Life Force or Qigong to strengthen my energy field. I can see if I need to change my circumstances, or I need to use my circumstances in order to change myself. I'm going to read that last line again. I need to see, by checking in for divine guidance and getting support, whether I need to change my circumstances or whether I need to use my circumstances to change myself. Sometimes we can't stand up. I mean, I'll tell you honestly, if I were in a concentration camp and somebody opened their door and said, "You can leave now," I'd go. I wouldn't sit there and say, "You know, I'm really learning a lot from this experience. I think I'll stay." I'll say, "Thank you, God. I think I've learned enough from this experience. There are other ways to grow." You know, we don't have to stay in hell in order to keep growing, but sometimes we can't leave. Sometimes in our inner beings we know we can't leave because we're not ready. Because we haven't learned what we need to learn from an experience, and that can stop us, and that's a healthy thing. I haven't been able, it's like what God told me, you cannot leave this husband because you haven't healed your self-hatred yet. And when you do, you'll leave. And one day I woke up and I said, I've healed my self-hatred, I'm going, and it was over. That marriage was over, like that. And I couldn't end it for years because I had not healed the crack. Because if I hadn't healed the crack, I would just have gone into the next relationship where the same thing would have happened. So we can always thank the dark side. Do I blame the dark side or my cracks for my defeats? Well, guess which one we tend to blame. Oh yeah, it was them, it was it. It was the energies that took me, it was everything. Everything but me. I had nothing to do with it. Do I take responsibility for these cracks? What am I doing to heal them? And remember, they're not only our individual cracks, they're our collective cracks. So that, again, we have to work with the collective. Create a collective vortex of change. How the dark side supports us to stop it from ruling the world. See, when we learn from our experiences with the dark side, we can speed up our evolution. Evolution is going to happen anyway, but we can speed it up. That's what we're trying to do. James had a great way of describing living with reality. He called it a guide to accelerated evolution, right? I loved that. I thought, that's it. That's what this is. It's a guide to accelerated. We're going to evolve anyway, but does it really take us thousands of years to figure this thing out? Can we move this along and only take a few hundred years to make this particular change? We can turn the tables on the dark side altogether. And how can we do that? By recognizing the collusion between the ego and the dark side. We know that fighting from the ego position only multiplies negative energy. So in order to fight the domination of negative energy, we must fight against the domination of our egos. And we do so by fighting for ourselves. We must become increasingly aware of that self for which we must fight is the inner self, not the ego self. And so by taking on the dark side, we are required to increasingly differentiate from the ego-based self, which is the fodder for the dark side. Let's look at an example. If we go through a major economic recession and I lose my job, I can easily become depressed, and then I will become lunch. But if I'm aware of that weakness, I can release the need to earn money in order to feel my value. I may still need money, but I don't need money to feel my value. I can do that. I can release the need to earn money in order to feed my value. And I can start identifying my value as being based on my inner being. Now I am learning to transcend the domination of the ego and to connect to myself. Similarly, I go through a divorce. I can stop the downward spiral of anger and self-pity by developing a relationship with myself, with others, and with the source. If I go through severe illness and become disabled, I have to start developing a joyous connection with my inner life, because there ain't anything else. We have to find in each case the antidote of what seems impossible. It seems impossible, but I can't. This is too horrible. I don't care how too horrible it is. If I'm not going to be lunch, I have to find some way to find some peace and some well-being and some growth in this situation. When we identify our cracks and start to heal them, the dark side has taught us that the ego is making us vulnerable. It is simultaneously forcing us to connect to ourselves. Seen in this light, the dark side is actually our friend. It forces us to more effectively develop our awareness of the dark side and its secrets. It forces us to more consciously deal with our egos and the way they dominate us. It forces us to practice becoming integrated so we won't be lunch. And it forces us to fight for the inner self that many of us may have only glimpsed. The dark side is sowing the seeds of our power to transcend its domination. And we know this from experience, that people who go down to the bottom are sometimes the ones who rise the furthest. Because in the darkness of their lives, if they have the capacity, whether it's a God-given capacity or it came from a support network, somehow they have that capacity to turn the tables, to learn the lessons, to move into the evolution, or even sometimes just to have the moment of grace. That person is the one who is the most healed, because they have turned the table on all that negative self-talk and all that self-judgment and all those beliefs and all that negative programming that has created this to start with. The dark side is sowing the seeds of our power to transcend its own domination. And that's how we have benefited from the dark side. And we can all identify, every single one of us, that there have been times of great stress where we were able to transcend somehow. Every one of us has had an experience of ourselves that is amazing. Now I'm going to give you another tool. This takes off from a tool we learned earlier. When we are feeling overwhelmed and full of despair, that's probably a clue that we're in the grip of the dark side. In these moments, let's point our second and third finger to some imaginary energy field in front of us and send it chi. Life force energy. Just intending to send chi automatically connects us to the source. See, in that moment that I say I'm going to send you chi, I'm connecting to the source, because I can't send you chi if I'm not getting it from the source, right? And the moment that I'm connected to the source, it decreases my vulnerability to the dark side. Once we feel the power of our connection to the source as the chi flows through us, and our fingers are pointed forward, we think about the arena of life in which we feel blocked or defeated. We challenge ourselves not to throw in the towel. We send the dark side chi, and we say out loud, if possible, I know you're trying to make me feel something. You're trying to make me feel that this relationship is hopeless. But I know but I'm making progress in this relationship, and I'm not going to let you stop me. Or I know you're making me feel that I will never come out of this depression, but me sitting here right now sending you chi is proof that I can and I will. And I already am, and I'm not going to let you stop me. This is how we muster our determination. We are not creating any negative energy. We are fighting for ourselves. We are connecting to the source simultaneously. We're sending chi to the dark side. We are empowering ourselves, the dark side, and we are evolving, because that is always the moment before the evolution. And here I'm going to read you this last part, and then I'm going to go on to the 7th. Writing this chapter has been very tough. I don't feel very inspired. I'm tired. I have a headache. I feel like it's going on forever, and I think it has no value. A lot of people have felt that about the chapter on accountability, right? And I saw it. It made me feel so good to come into the workshops and see how people were not wanting to be accountable. It made me feel better about how screwed up I felt when I was trying to write this chapter. And that was just the accountability part. Now we're up the dark side part. Do you think the dark side might be enjoying this moment of me feeling like I think it has no value? So, and this actually happened. I was writing this in real time. So I point my 2 fingers forward, and this is what I did. Connect to the source, send chi to the dark side, and say, I know you're trying to make me feel that I'll never be able to help people overcome the domination of the dark side. But I will, and I already have, and I'm not going to let you stop me. It is difficult not to be impacted by negative energies when we are surrounded by people who are. Don't you think it a little unrealistic to expect us to be the only human beings on the planet who are not dominated by either the ego or the dark side? This is not an excuse for throwing in the towel. But it is a call for us to embrace reality and to have patience and compassion. And the corollary is true as well. The collective energy can be our strength as well as our weakness. Every time we confront the domination of the dark side, we are joining with the efforts of others. And as we join together, we become the collective that will heal the collective cracks in the collective energy field called the human race. Because the human race is not a series of individuals. It is a collective energy field with a collective consciousness. And if we do, we all evolve. I guarantee it. Now, who said that? I guarantee it. It wasn't me. I said, I guarantee this. I, Beth Green, am guaranteeing anything. Nonsense. That wasn't me speaking. I knew that I was channeling a voice and a power greater than myself. And finally, the dark side needs us to fight for ourselves so that it can evolve into consciousness and return to the source. What a beautiful concept that is.
Yeah.
Now there really is no opposition. It's all oneness and mutual support. Just like if a person is being abusive to themselves and others, if a person is being abusive to us, when we do what we can to try to stop that abuse, could you wake up, Casey? When we do what we can to try to change that, to confront that abuse, to stop it if we can, we are not only fighting for ourselves, we are fighting for the integrity of that other person. We're fighting for their ability to heal. We are having faith in the shift that is possible. And we're also fighting for the dark side, because the dark side wants to evolve. Because the dark side is part of the collective consciousness, that it is, and this is something that I take on faith because this is what God told me to write. So I believe what I wrote, not because I know it's true, but because God told me to write it, and if God changes her mind, I'll change what I say. But anyway, I can feel it. I can feel it. There is the impetus towards evolution is shown by the insects, by the germs that mutate, by all of us. There is within us that capacity to evolve. We talked about that in relation to the ego, that the ego too can evolve into consciousness, can't it? The ego is supposed to tell us that, hey, we need this, but doesn't have to be into separation. Why would I think that the dark side wouldn't evolve? Who the hell wants to be a parasite anyway? Always vulnerable, always looking for the next meal, the next handout. Why wouldn't the dark side want to return to the source? You know, it's funny when you think about myths, what they tell us about our own psyches. The myth of Lucifer, the fallen angel. Why wouldn't Lucifer want to go home? Don't you think it's cold out there?
Right?
I mean, who would want to be around all that negativity? Even the dark side doesn't like itself. It's too negative. We are supporting the dark side to evolve. That's why the dark side is actually helping us to figure out, how did I learn the 7 dirty secrets of the dark side? Somebody must have told me. I didn't figure this out. I didn't just sit down and say, now what could that be? It was like, oh, and this, and this, and this, and there it was, and I looked and I said, oh my God, I've just written something. Where did that come from? They're letting us in, dudes.
Yeah.
They're giving it away. They're telling us because they want us to do something. Don't be passive and let us eat you up and just keep growing and growing like a big cancer, a fungus.
Just like Darth Vader.
Yeah, did Darth Vader do that?
Well, his son was Luke Skywalker, and they were there to fight, right? But Luke refused to fight him, even though the Emperor was saying, feel your anger. You know, like he's trying to get that.
Yeah.
Luke realized it, because no, that's not it.
Yeah.
Right? And Darth Vader had the opportunity to kill Luke, and then he gave it up too. So he gave up he literally gave up the dark side, took off his mask, connected to Luke, and that was it.
There you go. That actually reminded me of something that happened in history, Spartacus. The rebellion of if I have this correct, he was a Roman slave that was thrown into the pit in order to fight other slaves to the death, and he rebelled. Started a rebellion of the slaves, the gladiators. That's the word, the gladiators. Thank you for reminding me. It's like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to join forces. And they fought for themselves. They didn't turn around and just kill all the Romans. They were fighting for themselves. What does the dark side evolve into? How could it still stay in existence, but as a real energy connected to the divine? By becoming consciousness, of course. Think of it. The purpose of the dark side is to show us our weaknesses and inspire us to heal. But if we had consciousness, we wouldn't need the dark side to show us our weaknesses and help us transform. We would notice them. Oh, duh. We would look at the vase and see the cracks without needing the ink to seep through. We would use awareness to evaluate the holes in the dam instead of waiting for the dam to break and the population to drown. We could use our common sense to interrupt the urge towards promiscuity instead of waiting until we have a sexually transmitted disease or unwanted children. We could use consciousness to evaluate when we need to sleep instead of waiting until the caffeine wears off. We could use our experience and awareness to avoid the pain inflicted on ourselves and others by being dominated by dark side energies and allowing ourselves to be hurt or to hurt others. The evolution of the dark side is like all evolution. It has no end point. It has no starting point. It is a process of becoming, not a state of being. It is simultaneous with our own evolution. The dark side is evolving as we evolve because we are all one. As we use consciousness rather than pain to evolve, the dark side has served its purpose and it can transform into the consciousness that allows us to not need the dark side anymore. Are people getting this?
Hear, hear. Viva la revolution.
Should I read the last paragraph again? There's some, okay. Remember, it's in the book. You can read it over and over. The evolution of the dark side is like all evolution. It has no end point and it has no starting point. It is a process of becoming, not a state of being. It is simultaneous with our own evolution. As we use consciousness rather than pain to evolve, as we, the people sitting in this room, use consciousness rather than pain to evolve. When we use our consciousness, develop it, the dark side has served its purpose. And it can transform into consciousness that allows us to not need the dark side anymore. In other words, the source doesn't need the dark side when we have consciousness. The dark side doesn't need to be the dark side when we have consciousness. Because we can all transform into consciousness. And evolution can become going towards the light instead of running away from the darkness. Just talking about this yesterday. So many of us who have been in bad places with our addictions, we go to 12-step programs because of the wreckage. And then we stay because of the promises. And so it is with the dark side and consciousness. At first, first, we're so horrified by the damage we've done that we feel, oh my God, I've got to do something about it. But then after a while, we don't need the dark side to keep telling us, if you do this, you're going to get pregnant. If you do that, you're going to break your neck. If you do this, it's going to have bad effect. We begin to evolve because we see another possibility. We can start moving towards that potential because we start to have that self-love and that foundation for the next levels of evolution, which we will get to, of course, in platforms 8 and 9. But we don't need the dark side anymore, and then the dark side can start to wither away. The dark side is evolving towards consciousness. The ego is evolving towards consciousness. We are evolving towards consciousness. We can join, at some point, we can join forces. And why not do it today? Why not have the ego and the dark side and us join forces? To become more conscious. So we don't need all of this pain and suffering. Becoming accountable is about developing the capacity to regulate the flow of our own energy, and we can't do that if we're dominated by the ego or the dark side. But we can do that, and that's what we're going to hope that we can accomplish even more when we get to Consciousness Boot Camp 2. Where does the Healing Arts Theater come in? At the conversation between the ego and the dark side? Okay. I'm going to close now, and I'm going to ask that tomorrow morning we pick up from the conversation between the ego and the dark side with amends between humanity and the ego. So you will know that that's what you're up to. But so for now, I'd like to ask not what questions you have or what you're thinking. How are you feeling right now?
On track, inspired, grateful, gratitude.
Wow.
Clear goal.
I could see why this chapter was so blocked. It was an effort for me to stay engaged and listen, and I so wanted to drift.
Same with me. I need to watch this again. This morning I was great, in about the first half hour of this afternoon, and I was like, it is not going in. So I'm feeling just like the reality of that. It was tough for me to stay with it. So, but I'm not judging myself, so that's good. And I did have a moment of like seeing my dynamic with Aiden and how he gets negative and then I get negative about his negativity, and I'm seeing my own. That may be why I was going to sleep, because it's like, I complain about him, but I'm being just like him. So.
You could think about the dark side as having ego too. And you could say that the ego of the dark side that wants to perpetuate itself ad nauseum in its same form is going to try to block you from hearing.
Right. Yeah.
And you're going to get knocked out. But the dark side itself wants us to evolve.
Right.
That's what I'm teaching. That, as James would say, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Why? So when you feel like you're falling asleep, you could say, oh, okay, there's an aspect of my consciousness that doesn't want to hear this, but the dark side doesn't want me to hear it either, but it does.
Right.
And we can live with that paradox. And why am I going to stick with the story that the dark side really wants this? Aside from the fact that somebody told me these 7 little dirty secrets, aside from that, it's because
what's the alternative?
what is the alternative? If we don't believe it, we're defeated.
Yeah.
We in the stream believe in useful beliefs. They don't have to be right. They only have to be helpful. Because we don't know the truth anyway. We always say that. I don't know the truth. But this sure sounds good to me. Yeah. I'm going to bet on this horse.
And it's not fantasy either. It's not.
And we've seen it working.
Yeah.
We've actually seen it working. Is there anything else that anyone needs to share before we close?
Or you're saying that we're going to get to Anya at some point?
I didn't say that we do it today.
Oh.
I said we would get to it at some point. And maybe tonight, when are you staying over tonight?
Yeah, I'm staying with Annette and Ron.
Excellent. I wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
What a responsibility on them. No, I'm kidding.
Not them, all of you.
Well,
What?
it's just you do this and it's gone, and I don't want to, like, you know, impose it on other people.
What, you're going to talk to Annette and Roz tonight?
Yeah, I get it. It just, we didn't get anywhere till lunch, so I just usually I'd rather just kind of.
It might not be tonight for me because I'm not getting there till late, but I could do it tomorrow morning.
I don't understand what you're saying.
You don't want to.
She's
I'm
the
just,
one with the
the dark
responsibility.
side is fighting the process.
Oh, okay, that's all. Okay, that's fine. And that's just, and if it is, and if you're being impacted, what is it telling you? That there's a crack, right? So if you were falling asleep, it's just a call to awareness. Change it to a call to awareness. It's a call to awareness. It's a call to awareness. Some of you may feel different about this anger workshop now than you did this morning.
I want to be there. I hope for it.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful because you've seen yourself turn to anger and you don't like it. And we have to learn, what's it trying to teach us?
Right. The way I feel about resentment.
Yeah,
I see it.
yeah.
A place to hide, oh my gosh. No, a place to evolve.
Is there anything else that anyone needs to share? Helen?
I feel inspired by the talk because I feel like it's so logical and we see it happening every day, and we can do this. We are doing it.
Yes.
Yeah. I can, we can. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's similar, but it feels like a door has opened up. Like it's like a new world. Something is open.
Really?
Yeah. It's like a different, it's like.
Like you're getting it on a deeper level?
I think so, yeah. And I know I had, as I mentioned to you, a couple thoughts recently, like, oh, the dark side is here and it's going to support me to evolve. I have actually had that thought a couple times. That's very different. But yeah, deeper now. It's like, this is like a whole different plane of existence. How it feels.
I'm very happy to hear that, especially from people who've already read the platform and have been doing the work, but feeling like somehow it's penetrating on a deeper level. I'm very happy to hear that. And for those of you for whom it's new, I'm very happy to hear that it inspires you and you feel more clarity. So we shouldn't be afraid, should we? No. The dark side doesn't want us to be afraid of the dark side because then we'll never fight for ourselves and then it'll never evolve. And then we're going to keep everybody in hell. The day that I had that experience going to Master High and coming back and having seen the dark side, I saw a vision of Lucifer. Now again, this is just a metaphor, right? I saw, and a song came to me, and this is what it was. And Lucifer was right there. Master High is a friend of mine, and so are you. Master High is a friend of mine, and so are you. Master High is a friend of mine, friend of mine, friend of mine, and so are you. And then I went on and I put in the names of all kinds of people that I had trouble with and people who I helped, and then I would say, I am a friend of yours, and so is she. And that song just went on until I managed to get home safe and sound. And I don't think I've ever shared that story with anybody. But that's what happened. I don't want to be afraid of this life. And as we end this platform, of course we have another day's workshop, but this teaching, Platform 7, is the end of becoming partners with ourselves, and it's the beginning of that next evolutionary phase where we come into partnership with the process of living itself. And how important is this moment, this piece, in order to take that next step in evolution, to become relaxed into the process of living. is that we can stop being afraid of everything and of life and somehow relax into the process of living, no matter how hard and painful it is, and sometimes only seems. Thank you.
Thank you.